Okay. So today, cheers, Scotch and Watch. So the way this works is that when I started this newsletter years ago, everybody used to ring me about 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, Australian time, where I live in Sydney, and ask my advice on stuff. And I was always sat in front of the telly, watching telly and drinking Scotch. And so it became a bit of a joke to my mates that we used to call it Scotch and Watch, because I was like sipping away and watching TV. But now I've decided to make it into a business and make it into a podcast. So now I'm still having Scotch, and everybody else is watching, and this is working. So today, this is the second episode of Scotch and Watch. My name's Ricky Sutton, and I'm the author of the Future Media newsletter. I'm joined by Chris Duncan. Chris, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, good morning, Chris Duncan. I unfortunately am not on the Scotch Watch because it's 8 o'clock in the morning here in London. So I'm the founder of C Delta, and delighted to be here today.
And the former CEO of Bauer Media. So he's hiding his light under a bushel. Today, we're going to be talking about TikTok, and I know there's going to be a couple of people from TikTok on. So I'm looking forward to that. Really, what I tend to focus on is on new business models and the collision between big tech and big media. I've always been interested in that and the dynamics of that, and it's obviously become more and more interesting recently. I've not really paid an awful lot of attention to TikTok, to be honest. I've been much more focused on Google and Meta and kind of Amazon and these guys. But TikTok is an absolute beast. And so I commissioned some research to understand the size of this business. And it's really shocked me. And after really digging deeply into the operations of the business, how it makes its money, what it's doing well, what it can do better at, I think I've identified a couple of ways that it can benefit the news media industry globally. And because Chris has much more experience than me about magazines, whereas I'm more newspaper and broadcast, this was an opportunity to talk about how that might work. So to set the scene, let me just run you through some of the core stats that came out of the research that I did, which are just mind-blowing. And I'll be running this video and this data in the Substack in the next couple of days at Future Media. So a couple of things. Number one, TikTok is growing faster than Facebook and Instagram ever did, even at their absolute peak. It just seems that people everywhere seem to like TikTok more. Okay, so that's interesting. It's growing faster than YouTube at video. More people are uploading more videos to TikTok than they do every day to YouTube, which is amazing. And YouTube, that's been around forever and a day, it seems like, TikTok's going to overtake its earnings in the next 18 months. Amazing. TikTok has been really aggressive and radical, aggressive in a business sense, not in any other sense, in terms of the fact that it's done things that other people are afraid of. So it invested early in building an entire self-service advertising suite and tech stack in a direct attack on Google and Meta. And last year, TikTok's ad revenue rose 68%. Now, Google, over the same period, rose 12%. So it's 5 times as fast as that. And Meta grew 22%. All right. So it's 3 times as fast as Meta in its ad revenue. And TikTok has a shop. It's been launched to take on Amazon's e-commerce business, and it did $4 billion in its first year. And Amazon achieved $15 million in 2 years after its launch. So everything this company does seems to turn to gold. So it's not so much a kind of social network. It's more of a time bomb for Silicon Valley because it's attacking every single one of the foundational partners in there. And I was laughing, Chris, you live in England, I'm English. It kind of reminded me of a country house. Big tech kind of feels like a country house. It's a little bit old. It used to be grand, but now it's a little bit old and a little bit cracked, and there's a little bit of lichen growing up here in the gutter. It feels a bit like that. And you can kind of see that if that's the situation, you can understand why the White House feels a little bit threatened by this Chinese juggernaut that's about to upturn 25 years of stellar growth and American exceptionalism. So I'm going to shut up in a minute, but I'm just trying to set the scene on the numbers. So I've been all the way down into the TikTok numbers over the last week. And as I said, I've found 3 nuggets that I think throw up a massive opportunity for the publishing industry if it can find a way to collaborate and work hand in hand with this TikTok rocket ship. So let's talk about that for a sec. The first thing is And many of you on this call, I can see your names popping up. Many of you I know are in the news media industry, and I know many of you. So the first thing is that I don't know if you've noticed, but Google in the news industry in the middle of a really messy divorce. Okay, it's not looking good. It's quite unpleasant, and all of that is not going to get any better. And then you look at Meta. Look, if Meta's the wife that's already left with the kids and changed the locks, right? They're gone. They're never coming back. So can TikTok be News's next BFF? So that's really what this is about today. So, Chris, what do you reckon? Friend or foe?
Always. So I'll give a slightly counter point. So I remember. I definitely remember the days when we were very excited about Google being a friend, and then we thought Google was not going to be maybe a perfect friend, and then Facebook came along, and we were very excited about the fact that Facebook would be the new friend, and that would be the rival to Google. And so when you look at TikTok, I think I'm always looking at it saying, okay, is this a sort of the latest challenger, or is this a permanent partner?
Mm-hmm.
The interesting thing about those three companies and their different bits is Google was brilliant at building search. And so it in return for indexing your site, it delivered traffic, and that originally was a great deal.
Yeah.
Facebook came along and said, well, actually, what we're going to do is we're creating this amazing social graph. And so rather than being a kind of a site graph, we're going to be a social graph, and we're going to connect your friends and family and the things that you love. And that's the sort of superpower of Facebook. I think what's so fascinating about TikTok is they came along maybe 7 or 8 years ago when they bought Musical.ly.
Yeah, that's right.
So at the time they were a site that sort of was looking for its superpower, and they bought a lip syncing app. I know many people on the call, John Barnes particularly, will have been a huge lip syncer in his time. People making videos, lip syncing to songs, and that was the sort of almost the powder keg that kind of shot TikTok to public recognition. But TikTok is a pure content graph. And I guess to explain that, it's like TikTok doesn't need to know who you are, who your friends are, who you're following. It doesn't actually, you could be anybody and join TikTok. And I think that the research says within about 38 minutes, the algorithm is basically pumping you exactly the content that it thinks you need, which is why, so the superpower of TikTok is that anyone, anywhere in the world who puts a video on TikTok that's good enough to get to the top of that algorithm can be a global celebrity, a Warhol-esque, famous for 15 minutes, global celebrity 20 minutes later, because of the sheer power of just pure content recommendation. So
which is an
incredible
amazing
thing, right?
So just on that, just as a segue, because you've just put me into the numbers. So again, like I said, I've just done a ton of research into this. Let me give you some numbers, okay? All right. And I always try and make numbers that are so mind-blowingly ridiculous. Try and make them something that you can hold on to or you might remember. So how about this? So here are the number of TikTok users, okay, in 11 jurisdictions. Now, these are only Western jurisdictions, okay? So number one, America, 183 million. So there's only 333 million people in America. So that's more than 1 in 2 Americans, right? So if you get rid of the old people, the babies, and the dogs, all right, that's a lot of Americans, right? So that's 183 million in America. There's 127 million TikTok users in Indonesia, 96 million in Brazil, 58 million in Mexico, 43 million in Pakistan, 38 million in the UK, 32 million in Germany, 29 million in France, another 29 million in Italy, 25 million in Japan, 24 million in Spain. If you add them all together, okay, that's 684 million people using TikTok, okay? And as I said, to try and relate it to something that you can put a finger on, and by the way, I didn't do this math myself. I might have got something to help me do the research. That's roughly the number of kilometers it is from here to the sun. That is a lot of people, and that is only, add all those together, that doesn't include China. And 75% of its users are in China and not included in those numbers.
Yeah,
mind blowing.
It's a monster, isn't it? And it does, as we said, whenever you look at those breakdown stats, the one thing you always have to acknowledge is that the world forgets how big Indonesia is. consistently.
Yeah, absolutely. So the other thing, so it's obviously massive in terms of people. It's massive in terms of money. It's massive in terms of influence, right? Because unlike the other social networks around, this company really focuses and is most popular with younger people. And so, it has geopolitical issues there because, it's Chinese owned. Obviously, it's owned by ByteDance.
Yep.
It's only 15% of ByteDance's earnings, by the way.
Mm.
Just to give you a slight idea of how big ByteDance is, and all of this just gets more and harder to comprehend. But it's a Chinese-owned app that talks to American youth more than American politics, more than the White House. And so that obviously raises a lot of concerns. But if you're also a rival social network like Meta or Snap or anyone really, especially X, right? These guys are bigger than you, growing faster than you, earning faster than you, or growing revenue faster than you, talking to younger people than you. It feels scary on all sides. Now, it's a bit difficult not to feel really happy about that and feel they're kind of getting a bit of their comeuppance. But I mean, what do you think? I mean, they're so comprehensive.
Well, I think it came up. It came up as a great rival, and as you say, we always want competition. Yeah, certainly the news and magazine industry. All you want to see is that there's a kind of level playing field. That there is good competition. There's the chance for people to sort of choose which of these people they partner with. So when TikTok kind of came up, there was a huge kind of rise. It took a while for people to work out. You have to commit to short form video. The sort of length of the clips on TikTok is designed for an attention span. A particular attention span. The way that they're made is slightly different. So there's always an adaptation, but that news orgs have been doing that for years. That each platform you need a slightly different kind of team to do that. So I think that was you. I think the as we know, and we should just cover this off, in a very brief sort of summary. So they obviously are threatened in the US, and so when we came to this conversation about, there was a sort of congressional question about, well, can we have a Chinese-owned app that is, any Chinese company has obligations to the Chinese government, and it's, as you say, broadcasting to the youth of America, and it is not, one of the things with that kind of pure content world, almost Darwinian content world, is the moderation is very, very light to non-existent. And so there's a question that was raised in the American courts about, is this there's a huge acronym which is basically about foreign adversaries owning media and broadcasting into the US. And so
what is that? FOAMBOAS.
Yeah, it's like so there was a decision made which said, okay, look, actually, TikTok, we you can't do this. You are a foreign adversary, designated foreign adversary, and we need to basically get you to either stop operating in the US, resign your 183 million customers, or we effectively need you to become US owned. And so that came up during the Biden administration.
Yeah, that's right.
It kind of, Biden got it to like the last. It was meant to be sort of banned on the last day of Biden, and he reasonably kind of said, "Well, this is a transition question. This is a question for Donald Trump, who became a TikToker during the election, and who sort of casually booted the decision, sort of gave it a stay of execution, like a 27-day stay of execution. But the Supreme Court has ruled that they have to do something. That it does break the kind of foreign adversary laws. So that's still bubbling along in the background. And it looks to me like there's two choices, or a couple of choices there, all of which create interesting dynamics. One is that the US government says you have to sell to operate in the US, and ByteDance says then we won't operate in the US, and 183 million TikTokers lose service to the app. That's possible. The US government sort of suggestion was, hey, look, wouldn't it be better if you just sold 50% of the operation to the US? Maybe I know someone who might buy it, who owns a social network that needs a kind of boost. Maybe we could put together a group of people that we like that could buy it, and that's another option. But it's very unlikely that the Chinese government wants to do that, because it would also have to then give up its algorithm that does it. So this is all going to bubble up in the next sort of the next few weeks, maybe even sort of 3-4 weeks. And it ends up in a choice that says either Donald Trump has to say, I abide by the Supreme Court ruling, and therefore I will effectively shut down a social network on freedom of speech grounds, which doesn't chime with a lot of the rest of the position that the government's taking. Or he says, we insist that it's sold, in which case the Chinese government says no and takes it away. And so it's very uncertain at this point whether there is a deal to be done there, because whether any side can quite get over that. So what you might find in a month's time is, as you say, it's only the 183 million still leaves TikTok with a fantastic business, but it might be a European, Asian, South American phenomenon, and essentially the first network that is not American dominated but globally used. And that's kind of an interesting thing that we've got to watch the next few weeks. Was that good enough summary?
No, it's very good. So I think one of the interesting things about what I saw from that, if you like, political saber rattling, was that President Trump was the first to call for it to be shut down, then completely changed his mind by the time he got to election because of the size of its audience and the influence that it had, or whatever its reasoning was, and then had become a friend. Okay, so that had changed. And then he said he was going to jail Mark Zuckerberg. So he's kind of got social media in his sights, clearly. What was interesting, though, was that when the deadline for shutting down TikTok happened, it did actually switch off in the States. It flipped off dark.
Yeah.
And it was off for a little while. And when it was off, all of the people in America that were using it started to download a rival Chinese app to kind of stick a finger up to the authorities, which I thought was really interesting, because I'm not sure the public are quite so bothered about the Chinese ownership. That seems to be unique to Washington and the Beltway.
Yeah.
But then when it came back on, and I only saw this data today, the number of downloads of the TikTok app from the App Store, it went back on, I think, on Monday, are 5x what they were before. And it's already been downloaded 4 billion times globally. So what it's actually done is had the opposite effect of making everybody go, well, I better get it quick before they shut it down again. Here's my question for you, though. Imagine the roles were reversed. Imagine, or the geography was reversed, the poles were reversed. And this was an American app trying to get into China. What do you think would happen then? Because, can you imagine the American government going, well, China's saying to America, we have to buy it.
Yeah.
How do you reckon that would go down?
I mean, there would be outrage, there would be tantrums, there would be Truth Social posts. Absolutely no way. I mean, it does leave it. So I think we talked before with this. It leaves the UK in quite an interesting position, because let's say the US says this is a foreign adversary, we're going to ban it, right? The UK, to do that, if the UK started to say, hey, we don't like foreign-owned social networks operating in our jurisdiction, you could see the problem, right? That it has to ban. There are a lot of foreign-owned social networks. You've mentioned some of them on this call, so it leaves the UK and other jurisdictions in a slightly more difficult position. But yeah, the other way around, this would not be a conversation. Did you see Truth Social's numbers, by the way?
I didn't. Please share.
A beautiful set of accounts. I think $180 million operating loss, $400 million total loss, $3 million of revenue. Strong business.
Yeah, no, that sounds like it's a media company.
Yeah, exactly.
They're doing it exactly right. Oh my goodness. Well, look, the challenge that this presents is that we live in a World Wide Web that's not global, and we live in a internet that's run by Google, and a social world for the West that's pretty much owned and run and managed by Meta. But neither of them are actually the leaders anymore. And so it's really fascinating to me that, we've got antitrust actions and court actions to try and stop monopoly control of US tech companies happening in America by America. Okay. But the biggest threat of all to all of these tech companies is actually TikTok coming from China. And it's almost like a proxy for the changing world order, isn't it? I don't want to get too geopolitical about it. But, America's not quite the America it was, and China is rising at an incredible pace. And so I don't quite know how this gets managed, really. But what I can tell you is that whenever I look at what's actually driving all of the kind of societal change across all of humanity, it can never, ever, ever, ever be decoupled from big tech.
No.
because it's all tied to money and politics and people and power.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's so interesting when you think about it that we're talking about a kind of new entrant, a challenger, which should be a disruptor in the industry, but we're also talking at the same time about whether Google and Apple put the app back into their app stores.
Yeah.
So even if you have a challenger, this is the nature of the mobile internet. Even if you have a challenger, they're still operating through the app stores of the incumbent. So that's definitely
Yeah.
the case. I think, not to get too philosophical, but there is definitely this. I was quite proud of the Splinternet, which was
Yeah.
just to describe. There is a Chinese version of the internet. There is an American version now. There is a European version. The UK is doing its diplomatic best to kind of tiptoe between the UK and the EU version of it. But there is essentially a kind of libertarian internet, privacy-based internet, and essentially a sort of surveillance-based internet, which is the Chinese version. And more and more companies in the next few years are going to have to operate only in some of those jurisdictions because the trade-offs to try and operate in all of them is too much. So this is kind of option one. I think the other question, so TikTok, the one thing TikTok is, it is ruthlessly focused, right, on effectively delivering as much content as it can into your eyeballs, in the time that it keeps you on the phone.
Yeah.
It's not trying to do a lot of other things. It's not, for example, spending 75 billion in capex on also trying to grow its kind of AI business. It's not tied up in. It's only got one court case. It's not tied up in a lot of the other things that Google and Facebook are. So you do think it can still continue to kind of grow at this rate because of its sheer focus, and it's a pretty simple model executed brilliantly.
Mm. All right. So I'm going to carry on charging through this, but I can see that quite a few of you are on the line now. You're all completely free to write a message and ask a question, or join in, or offer an opinion. This is a team play. I know most of you. You're my mates.
Yeah.
And if you're not my mate, I reckon you're Chris's mate. So you guys should join in where you like. Just going back to your point about the app stores, though. So the interesting thing is that each of those app stores, Google's or Apple's, both take 30 cents on the dollar of all transactional revenue on the apps that have been downloaded from their app store. And the revenue that TikTok wrote last year was $16 billion. Now, that sounds like tons. It's actually not an awful lot compared to Meta, which is 135, or Google that's sitting at kind of 350, right?
Yeah.
It's small in comparison, but it's growing a lot faster. But if TikTok was to go away like that, if America decided to turn it off at the mains, pull the plug out, then a big chunk of that $16 billion is going to disappear from the bank accounts of those two American companies. So there are challenges that will directly impact on the kind of the retirement funds of Americans.
Yeah. Well,
hang on. Just before you do, I just want to say hi to Jennifer. Jennifer sent us our first ever note on a live call. Hi, Jennifer.
You're our mates now, Jennifer.
There you go. You're mates now. There you go. You're more mates than all the other people that are mates and haven't sent us any note. Sorry, go ahead, mate. We were talking about the fact that this has a massive implication for the economies and the earnings of many of these American companies.
Yeah, it's a little bit of it's a little bit of wooden dollars though, because essentially they'll lose it out of the services division, so they'll lose it as a cut out the whatever they lose as a cut out the App Store. But who's going to be the big winner? If you pull the plug on TikTok, where are that audience going to go for short form video? And the answer is going to be Reels on Instagram. It's going to be YouTube. There may be other services, but those are the most likely winners. Which is why I think, it's no great surprise, but I don't hear a lot of Meta and Google, trying to say, hey, this is unfair. We think they should be able to operate in the US because they're going to be the biggest winners if that service disappears. So I think net on balance, I suspect that the profitability of both the big players will increase if TikTok disappears.
Oh, you think they actually net win?
Oh yeah.
That's interesting.
Because the attention has to go somewhere. We're talking about you're talking about hours and hours and hours of each individual per day. Which is moving between the different, all of the different short form video kind of offerings that are out there. So you shut one down. I mean, I've got teenage kids. I very much doubt they're going to find that they've got a spare hour that they used to spend on TikTok and, start reading.
Take up woodwork.
Yeah, take up woodwork.
Is that right? So probably not. So here's an interesting thing. At the same time that I was doing this deep dive, I was doing another deep dive into. I'm a journalist, right? So I'm supposed to care about words and love words and pictures. But actually, do you know what I really love? I really love getting deep into numbers. I should have been a forensic accountant. Not something I would have ever thought I'd say. Financial crime, right?
Yeah. So you'd have made a great finance guy, Ricky.
So I decided to go and really dig deep all the way down into Google's numbers. And I found a really interesting stat that backs up what you've just said. So Google has kind of run out of audience. There's no more audience to get. All right. It pretty much has 90% of all search traffic in the world, and it gets more and more expensive to add another percentage, as you'd remember from your time.
Yeah.
And so eventually you decide to stop growing your audience and you start to put more ads on the pages and put the price of your ads up. Right? Yeah. Because you've got to show growth. Because going to the board and saying, hey, guess what? We finished growing, but anyway, look, it's been a great ride. Bad conversation. That's when CEOs go to look for another job in woodwork.
Yeah.
So here, I was trying to work out how Google was going to continue to return double-digit quarter-on-quarter growth. And I wrote a year ago now that it was going to go and mine advertising by increasing ad load and reducing the amount of money it spends with other companies. And here's what I found. 3 key things. The first thing is that Google has 3 areas where it generates revenue. All right. And I'm going to bring this back to TikTok. The first place it generates revenue, and its largest place it delivers revenue, is by serving adverts of its own onto its search pages. All right. And so that's $54 billion of earnings in the last 90 days. And the way it does that is it just runs those little ads, and they're tiny, but there's so many of them, all right, that it adds up to a huge number, 54 billion. And the amount of money that they made in the last quarter went up 12.5%. Now, it went up 12.5% because AI overviews, it's now answering the question on the page. And so it keeps people on the page for longer. The page is longer. It lets them get a couple more ads in, squeeze them in, and it increases the ad load. So that grew by 12.5%. Where they really went hard, though, which brings me back to what you're saying now about TikTok, is that they massively increased the ad load on YouTube. So the prices didn't move, but the number of ads they delivered on there rose by 13.5%. Now, that doesn't sound like a very big number until go and have a look at YouTube, and I bet you can see the difference. So there's more pre-rolls, there's faster mid-rolls. So they used to be 8 minutes, suddenly they're like 6.5. And they've pulled all these little strings to increase that. If you're right, they might be preparing the decks for readiness for a TikTok to go away and people to flood back to YouTube, because YouTube would be the natural catcher's mitt, wouldn't it, for the people that fall out of TikTok?
Yeah. Definitely. And so you can also see they're also pushing. I mean, I think YouTube's was originally pushing for slightly longer form video. I think in the UK it's just tipped over so that more YouTube watching is actually on smart TVs than it is on phones. So YouTube is also kind of becoming a sit back TV medium. Longer form content can hold different types of ads, but they could end up basically playing in 2 markets. One is the kind of short form video on mobile, and the other one is trying to compete for TV CPMs. That's how you get the price up of the ads on that side. So YouTube is an incredible business for Google. Just to go back to your AI overviews point, there's some research came out this week. If I could work out how to find it and drop it in the chat, I would. I might do that later. Which said that it shows basically the difference between articles that have AI overviews and articles that don't. So these are organic search articles, and the click-through rate between the two. So in January of this year, the click-through rate of articles, so this is the articles that would deliver traffic to publishers with article AI overviews compared to those without, the click-through rate is 6 times higher if there's no AI overview than if there is one. So, if you think what you're seeing with Google is, well, we really used to be a marketplace, where our kind of, there's a very early great quotes from Google back in like 2004, 2005, where they say, geez, no, we don't want to engage people. We want to deliver people. Like, we want to move people off the site.
That's right.
Definitely yeah, definitely that's changed because, as you say, how do you grow the earnings? If you just keep delivering the same amount of people, you're not going to do that. So you have to be able to hold people on the site more, and that's definitely what you're seeing from a publisher perspective. I think most of the publishers that are on the call, if there's a publisher on the call who thinks that traffic from Google is their growth plan for 2025, give us a wave and a thumbs up. But I'd be surprised if there are many that think that.
Yeah, and before you do that,
Mm.
I'll tell you that the third string or the third leg on the tripod of Google's earnings is its ad network, and those are the ads that it serves out to third parties you know, you go search for, what's the latest from the cricket, it sends you to cricket.com, right?
Yeah.
And that the network is where Google sends those ads. It's where AdX and GAM goes. Well, surprise, surprise. For the first time ever, sorry, it went down a little bit last year, but it went down a lot this year. So this year it went down 29%. So the amount of money of ads that it's sending out to third parties, and most of those third parties are publishers, is down 29%. So if you're Google and you're the CEO and you're trying to figure out how you're going to tell your shareholders in the next meeting, next quarterly update, that your growth is still 12%, then the only way to do it is increase ad load, increase prices, or take money from somewhere else. And what they've done is a bit of both. They've massively increased ads on YouTube, as we've just discussed. They've added AI overviews to keep more ads on their owned and operated pages, and they've decreased the amount of money they're sending through the network to publishers. It went from 10.4 billion to 7.9 billion in the past 90 days. So as a publisher, if you're relying on Google for traffic, and if you're relying for them on revenue, this is going to be a double whammy. So I think we need to start to prepare for a post-Google world, which is actually a pretty good segue, because one of the things I really wanted to dig out here, especially for the audience, given I can see who they are and I know what they're mainly interested in, is where are potential synergies for the news industry and the magazine industry and maybe the broadcast industry to be able to jump on board this rocket ship that TikTok represents. Okay, because as far as I can see, I'm looking in the sky and there are blazing planes coming out of the sky, and all the big tech guys are like this. Which, by the way, I'm not terribly unhappy about. Open sky is opportunity, but TikTok is like a rocket leaving gravity, right? So I identified three, and I mentioned them to you before, but let's go through them. I'll outline all three first because I think they're opportunistic, and then we can dive into them. So the first thing is that the data, that the deep dive that I did into TikTok's numbers and TikTok's statements, found that the fifth most popular activity on TikTok by TikTok users is reading news stories or following news brands. Now, news, it's not entirely clear what they define as news, but they would be professional publishers. Now, I'd imagine they'd be entertainment brands, Hollywood studios, movie trailers, all kinds of stuff. But to be honest with you, across our media panoply, of all the things that we do, that's really our space, and that's fifth. So I think we should feel quite happy about that. So that was point number one. Point number two was that the largest single contributor of new content being added to the platform is also defined as professional content creators. So these are broad, again, they don't define it, but we're talking about broadcasters, movie makers, creators, news brands, and every news brand has someone in the office now doing TikTok all day, right? Bang, 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 right? So if the people like it, fifth most popular activity across billions of people, and publishers or the news industry or the professional content industry as a whole is uploading, and it's the most energetic uploader, that means that these two, the audience and the creators, are both aligned. There's an opportunity there. But the one that's really interesting for me, and in my experience, you can please people all day long, but if it doesn't pay the bills, it eventually doesn't pass the pub test when it gets to the board. Yeah, you've been on boards, I've been on boards, I've reported to boards, I've had investors. And so eventually it all comes down to money. But here's an interesting stat. The one place where TikTok really suffers, okay, compared to almost everyone else, is the CPMs it's able to achieve, even in America. So its average CPM across its business everywhere is 89 US cents. Now, Google is $4.30. So I decided to go and do some research, right? How could that possibly be? Why would there be effectively a 500% disparity between what TikTok is spending? Because you can imagine that any ad agency is going to be delighted to have TikTok turn up, right? So you'd think that those prices would be closer together. This is the reason. Because Google has its Google Ad Network, the minus 20% number I just gave you a minute ago, those are all ads delivered on publisher pages outside search. Now, people on search are ephemeral, they're fast. Find, go, find, go, find, go.
Yeah.
It changes a little bit with AI overviews, but typically that's what it is. So the CPMs will always be low because of low engagement. But when the ad is delivered to a publisher, time on page is more than a minute. And when that ad is served onto a publisher's video, time on page might be 3 minutes. So if you add all that together, what you find is that the click-through rate and the time on site, okay, and the CPM that generates combined on Google is 5 times higher. Now, if you're TikTok and you want to close the gap on your rivals and you want to take a larger share of wallet in dollars, then you need to get from sub 1% close to 4%. And the best way to do it is to partner with publishers. Now, I would imagine that publishers would be only too happy to have a new ad partner after Google, given the situation that they're in. So 3 things. Number 1, people really like to consume professional content on TikTok, proven 5th most popular activity, 31% of people. Number 2, professional publisher companies and professional content creators are putting their content up faster than anyone else. Number 3, they have an audience that's engaged, that wants to spend considerable time and can raise CPMs. Good news for TikTok. Should be a marriage made in heaven. Tell me why it won't be.
Well, let's think about it. So there's a couple of definitions just to really push on. So what's the definition of news is interesting because there's a huge spectrum of things that count as news. Do I think, for example, that TikTok is going to be the natural home of the terribly erudite opinion pieces written in the New York Times, the Times? No. So you go to cheers to you. You go to the other spectrum. You go to the other end of the spectrum. Do I think it's going to do entertainment news brilliantly? Do I think it's going to do celebrity news brilliantly? Yes. That's the natural medium for it. So it is in a sense, it's the sort of mass market tabloid-ish end of.
It's Daily Mail and Sun heaven, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. The other thing that you can see in TikTok is that there's an amazing. I'll probably get the name wrong, but it's something like Wiltshire 999, which is a small local news site, which basically uploads all of the 999 calls. Call the police. It's literally things like someone's driven a car into the back of the post office and kind of stuff. That's doing millions and millions of views. So it's an interesting area for local news where this is kind of hyper local, people able to upload things into TikTok, and it's it's a very direct individual creator type of news. So that's kind of interesting. Your second bit on the content creators is TikTok undoubtedly defines kind of professional creators as people who are being paid for creation. That includes the whole of the TikTok influencer network. So amongst that kind of group of people will be everybody who is doing essentially influencer marketing in return for kind of influencer payments, and that's kind of managed through the TikTok creator program. That doesn't mean that there isn't an opportunity for creators. It just means that the bunch of people who are deemed professional creators, doesn't mean it's the equivalent sort of your traditional legacy kind of news and media organization.
Yeah, I get that.
It include them.
I think I'm one of those now, by the way, though. I think I've left the traditional media.
You're an influencer.
I've got one of those lights that's circular. I bought it today. I feel very, very silly. It's kind of like it's my influencer lighting.
Yeah.
Let's move on.
Yeah, you should move on. So that's interesting. And then on the CPMs, so firstly, so I'm trying to think with that, what's the sort of programmatic floor level? So if it's just a programmatic kind of ad, That's much more kind of the level that TikTok's showing, which also makes you wonder whether they put into that number um, all of the creator program goes into the ad
Mm.
number, or whether they count that elsewhere in the accounts. Because actually,
Mm.
you theoretically is much higher CPMs probably coming through in that side of the program than it will be in the programmatic ad piece. Um,
Mm.
but you would say, I mean, the whole point of this chat, I guess, is what's the potential. So we've kind of gone through and said, well, TikTok has it has the ability to grow audience, which is something that the big players maybe don't. They've kind of got this. They aren't making enough people for Google and Facebook to grow, their
Yep.
population. So it can grow people. You look at some of the mechanics of the ad money that they're making and the creator programs, and there's more opportunity to make money. So you're absolutely right. There feels like there is kind of still opportunity for growth, DOJ notwithstanding, um, and can for a lot of publishers, particularly as you say, the Mail, the Sun, the New York Post, kind of LA Times, down in your neck of the woods, all of the kind of News Corp titles. Um, the kind of journalism that resonates is definitely going to be something that can work on TikTok.
Mm.
You're going to have to put in, as you say, in newsrooms. It'd be interesting if there's uh, I know definitely we did this at Bauer. Uh, first of all, I think if there's people from Bauer watching, they know that I was very hard on the revenue. Originally, it was that you go through that period with all new platforms where they sweetly describe themselves as pre-revenue, and they come to publishers and say, "We'd really love you to kind of dedicate a team of people that you pay their salaries and learn how to be brilliant on our platform, because in time there'll be money." And as publishers, you're always a bit like, this might be the 15th one of you we've seen this week.
Hmm.
So we always made people work really hard to prove that there was going to be money coming from the program. But we also knew that generally the person in the office who was going to be able to produce kind of TikTok videos probably wasn't the editor.
Hmm.
So it also has had an interesting effect on kind of bringing in kind of younger creators into the newsrooms. The teams who are working on short form video in news and magazine organizations are probably making everybody younger. The average age
Yeah.
of sort of the people working in them. So it has an interesting
Which
effect
isn't
there
which
too.
isn't which isn't a bad outcome, right?
That's a good thing. It's a good thing.
So let's talk about Bauer for a second. So you were obviously CEO at Bauer.
Mm.
Um, the magazine industry feels a perfect fit for TikTok. You're talking about very deep niches,
Yeah,
very bought-in audiences, quite niche. It's a kind of a massive niches. Yeah.
yeah,
Um, that's got to be a beautiful place for them to go and play, I would have thought. I mean, the kind of high quality imagery, video, red
it's,
carpet,
yeah,
new cars, all
yeah,
that
yeah.
kind of stuff. That's got
I,
to
I,
fit.
I mean, actually, it's interesting that you mentioned the high quality bit. One of the things about the short form video world is it actually doesn't need to be high quality to succeed. It needs to be authentic, and it needs to be in a specialism, and it needs to be able to kind of just hit. It's like the platform games of your youth. It needs to be able to hit the kind of the bounce point at which it sort of shoots into the algorithm, and then it becomes interesting content. So you're absolutely right. New cars. When you're shooting for something like Car Magazine, you would go and create these amazing kind of luxurious, high touch photographic shoots, and then you get a graphic designer to kind of beautifully craft
Yeah.
that into double page spread, and it would be, jump off the beautiful kind of craft of magazines. But what actually sometimes we'll be working on TikTok will be the sound of the exhaust as it drives away, captured on a mobile phone,
Like my Aston
uploaded.
Martin.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
I don't have
Yeah,
an Aston Martin, but if I had one, that's what it would sound like,
it would
right?
be like that.
Yeah.
Uploaded in seconds from a mobile phone by a journalist who happens to be there.
Yeah.
And so again, it's a lot of the program. There's a lot of sort of practices, if you like, that have been brought up in the magazine industry about sort of how you create a quality print magazine, which are really challenged by how you knock out volume of short form video to kind of feed a platform like this, and that's for magazines a transition that is happening.
Right. So my wife's just joined. Hi, Liz.
Mm.
I think one of the other really interesting things to recognize here is that I'm a firm believer that in an AI world that we're entering into, the way that we're going to discover and then deliver content, okay, is going to be audio and visual. So I don't really use google.com at all now. I have an ongoing conversation, usually spoken, with Copilot or with ChatGPT. And when I'm in my car and I'm driving somewhere and I'm interested in a topic, I research for this, for example.
Yeah.
You know, I sat in the car for 40 minutes today going to buy my influencer ring and, you know, had a conversation with the AI to dive into details that I didn't actually know about TikTok. And so my conversation and my behavior around news content and factual conversations, both in delivery and discovery and delivery, is now audio. Okay. And so as that gets better and more efficient, it will then become in video as well, right?
Yeah.
And so what I find really interesting is that TikTok, whoever wins the UX battle to nail that, discovery and delivery, audio and visual in an AI world, whoever wins that is going to join Sam Altman on the rocket ship. Okay. And so that hasn't yet been nailed. And if you had to try and pick who it is in the list of kind of big tech companies that we're looking at and that we're following and that we're analyzing and that we're following in such massive detail, I can't escape the fact that all of the existing big tech companies that I believe are so dangerous to our industry and potentially fatal to it are also now established traditional companies being outmoded by a newbie.
Yeah.
And I got to say, TikTok looks like, I just can't find anywhere it doesn't hurt someone in that big tech community, right? And so I find it very difficult to think, even if America does ban them, that it isn't going to become dominant, which means that we as a news industry or as a professional content industry are going to have to engage with them eventually.
Yeah, I do wonder. I mean, we haven't talked a lot about it. I do wonder whether the Achilles heel is it is sort of what's been sort of referred to for a while as brand safety, but is really about moderation.
Yeah, that's where they can go wrong.
Yeah. So I think that there's something published this week which is talking about this is coming out of the German election. So Germany has an election on Sunday, I think. TikTok has sort of shown up as being the fastest to get you to radical content. And I think if you're TikTokers, you know that it's almost like the algorithm is so sensitive that anytime you kind of veer into an area, you'll very quickly, within 2 or 3 videos, you know, the recommendation engine is taking you to places that some people may not want to go. The moderation is not strong, and there is the volume of content that's being uploaded. As you know, moderating content at the scale that we're trying to discuss in advance of publication is almost impossible. And so it's always post moderation based on complaints. And so the Achilles heel, I think, of a lot of the platforms is, in the end, you're right. TikTok is kind of a grower and it's a coming platform, but it is still subject to the same questions about, is this something that we want to encourage, enable? Are our kids spending too much time immersed in this kind of content? If you look at the kind of, certainly in the UK, the rise of smartphone free schools, pushback in kind of the age verification. So I think that's maybe the Achilles heel that we haven't talked about, which is it might escape the kind of what we should start calling legacy tech.
Kind of legacy tech.
Legacy tech companies. Yeah. It might escape that, but it still has the same challenge around content moderation and safety. I think advertisers have proven, over the last decade, they like to talk about brand safety, that essentially the money follows the audience in most cases. So I'm not so sure that's an advertiser safety part, but I do think, we're going to see, go back to the original point about different governments and their view on regulation. There is going to be some impact, I think, on those businesses from a sense of how moderation should constrain them.
Yeah, I think you're right. And that's a really good point. Hey, look, I can see quite a few of you are still here. So if you've got any questions or any messages, do ping them in now. We'll wind up in about 10 minutes, but I'm more than happy to answer any questions as we go. Just on your point there, mate, I mentioned it as we were just jumping on. I know it's early in the morning for you, but story broke a couple of hours ago that TikTok has started firing its content moderators. to your point, and is starting to use AI in its place. Now that rings a bell with what happened at Facebook, and there was a huge pushback on that. So they are meeting the problem that you're describing, which is that we've got too much content to moderate.
I don't mean to be. I never. I don't mean to be too dystopian, but if you think about AI moderation from a Chinese perspective, Chinese market perspective, the amount of AI that's used in general, should we call it general kind of the Chinese population, how the government interacts with the population in China, and how connected some of that is, that's a very different model. AI moderation in that market is quite different from AI moderation in other markets. And I don't know if AI moderation is. I love the fact that in some ways we've had this great debate. If you listen to the words of Mark Zuckerberg in whichever period he's talking about moderation, he's decided that human moderators were biased, and so they were moving to different things. But at the same, do we believe that AI moderation will still need to have some sense of a set of rules? It has to train to moderate. So there is still a kind of human hand. There is still a subjectivity in AI moderation. Yes, it's cheaper, but is it going to be as effective or more effective than human moderation? Jury is very much out on that.
And then the bigger, you're right, but ultimately, let's say America's really unhappy. What's he going to do about it? Right. This whole thing is over the fence. Yeah. They can't go over there. They have no jurisdiction over there. Right. They could. Oh, actually, this is something I want to talk about. So, Dennis is on the line. Dennis is more than aware how I feel about Google and Meta. Okay. They came and parked a tank on my fucking lawn and took all my money and hurt my industry, and they've delivered nothing back, as far as I'm concerned. No value. They are not giving me good calories. They're giving empty calories for everybody, but they're killing my good calories along the way. Not happy. Not happy, Jan, at all about that. Here, though, the opportunity might be that we can make a new friend. Should we?
Well, I think so. I would look at this week a little bit at Apple News. It's a good kind of a good example of where, like, quietly there has been a place where publishers have made money. They've put their content in an aggregator. They've ended up with a partner who takes that kind of piece quite seriously, and it's turned out to be an additive kind of incremental revenue stream for the business. So that's the dream in a sense. Can you pick off new partners that give you some kind of exit ramp from the big players? And so I think the experience of publishers the last sort of 5 to 7 years is you have to have this sort of, you have to try and be friends with everybody who comes into the market, up to the point that you can prove whether they are going to be a revenue partner. It is very easy to be a distribution partner. Everybody wants to be your distribution friend, right? When you've got great content that you've invested in. So, if you sit in the CEO's office of a big news organization or a big magazine, organization, and you watch your inbox, the first 20 emails every morning are someone who really wants to understand your business problems because they can help you get to audiences that you cannot conceive through a new technology that is going to revolutionize publishing, right? That's the first hour of every day. Very, very few of those ever actually get to a point where they're a revenue contributor of scale, and hardly any have ever made it to be a revenue line. So that's the question on TikTok. Is this kind of my view at the moment is probably that most organizations have to diversify. They can probably support 3 or 4 kind of places that they could be really good at, that they can build teams that can excel in. And so the question is TikTok going to be one of those? Is it going to be generative enough from a revenue perspective that it justifies the investment in the team that are going to specialize in it? And I think most organizations right now are experimenting, and some are definitely seeing them in the mail. I would have thought is probably in the camp where it's saying this is this for us is a meaningful revenue. And I think some of the magazine companies will find that for specific titles, and others will find it's maybe they can't sort of cut through the algorithm in quite the same way.
Well, Google selling ads for publishers became, I'm just doing the maths quickly, 760. So, 12% of its revenue, Google's revenue, came from serving ads on publishers. And that 12% of Google is about 80% of publisher.
Yeah.
So that became a line item, didn't it?
Yeah.
And I think that that obviously happened. That emerged over 10 years, right?
Yes.
And in a different environment. But we're going to need to find a new Google, and TikTok's going to have to find a new way to make its CPMs not 89 cents.
Yeah.
So maybe I'm just overly optimistic. There's a question from Andrew here. He's basically asking, will the problems of moderation and brand safety ultimately mean that the cycle turns back to a safer and nicer walled garden internet, or will legacy tech devolve into what Twitter X has become? All right, the answer to that, Andrew, is one word: it's money. So, look, in my view, should it become the internet that you and I and everybody else signed up for, which is that we come here to find stuff? We're a digital democracy. This is a globalized world. We're going to share knowledge and information so people in sub-Saharan Africa can learn how to till their fields so no one dies of starvation. All of that. That was what we all signed up for. It's what I signed up for. It's what I truly believed in. I wrote a book once called Digital Democracy. I'm so glad it was never published, because I'd look like an absolute idiot now. But look, that's what I thought was going to happen. But it got derailed by this desperate need for money and wealth at levels that we've just never ever seen. We haven't seen since the French Revolution, right? And so, the 6 tech companies at the top of the most valuable companies. Here you go. Apple, 3.7 trillion. Nvidia, 3.41 trillion. I have them live on my wall. Microsoft, 3 trillion. Amazon, 2.3. Google, 2.2. Meta, 1.7. Right? $13 trillion, okay, of the value of the world is sitting in those 6 companies, okay? And that's 28% of the entire stock exchange. And Apple, on its own, is worth more than the entire FTSE, okay? Yeah. The entire FTSE on its own. How has this happened? This is monopoly in play, right?
But also, if you think about it, so the question of walled gardens, you look at Apple News, it's probably doing $2 billion in revenue, maybe a little more, but I mean, it's in the sort of single-digit billions. So out of the overall Apple, what was the number you just quoted? 3 trillion?
Apple, 3.7.
3.7 trillion, right? So, Andrew, I would love to say, that's going to happen, but the economics of that probably mean that users have to be paying for it. And as yet, there's been no solution where there is a kind of mass market paid for, site that can, or destination that can engage an audience at scale in order to keep that cost down. So that's really the challenge. Your publishers have not managed over the last 20 years. They've sort of early on worked with the tech companies because they delivered audience, or they delivered kind of new types of revenue. The challenge for the next 10 years is exactly how do you kind of jump through this an AI driven world, generative search, a lot of recommendation engines, and build something that is safe. And that perhaps is for another call.
Well, all right. Let's try and get a really brief kind of heat check on this. So let's end with, I just need you guys to answer Y or N on the question. So let's get you all involved. So Chris talked about it just now. I've talked about it a lot on stage. Dennis, you've seen me bang on about this before. I believe there's going to be a splinternet. I think there's going to be a premium internet, and there's going to be a cheap man's internet. It's going to be Harrods and Walmart. And the premium end of the business is going to go up here into a subscription paid for internet. And Google is going to fill this junky, what I call Wild West web, down here at the bottom of the tree with AI generated junk. And people are going to fall into these two camps. Okay. So my question to you is, if you had to pay $9.99 a month to have a premium internet that Google didn't fuck with, is the answer yes or no? So I'm going to throw it to you. I need votes. Because I'm going to take a heat map on it. So go. It's one letter with your finger, you guys. You can do it. It says "write message" at the bottom. I can see it. I'm
Morning,
waiting. That's a yes. We're 100% yes with one vote.
You're definitely a new friend, Jennifer.
It's definitely our new friend. 100%. This means that no one else is actually watching, right?
Yeah.
Well, you can all mail me. Oh, here we go.
Yeah.
It's still 100%. There's Andrew. I think there's a lag. I think there's a lag in voting, right?
Yeah.
So I'll let you get through to the end. Chris, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Tell me what the weather is at the moment in the UK.
Keep
voting.
As the Scots would say, it's dreek.
It's dreek.
It's dreek, which means it's kind of grey and it's sort of a bit mizzly. But there you go. You're off. What is it there? 85 degrees, balmy, wonderful.
Yeah, it's roasting. It's roasting and sunny, and everybody was at the beach today. It's all very, very lovely, mate. So we're trying to save the internet, but the world, as far as we can see, looks great.
It's great. The story that we did not get to today, by the way, is I just saw before I came on the call that Liz Truss is going to launch her own social network. So maybe that's the answer we've all been looking for.
Is it the trust internet we need?
Oh God! Don't start the tabloid headline machine. Don't fire it.
All right. Great to see you all. Thanks for joining. See you again. We'll line something up again, and we'll try again next week. You take care. Thanks very much, everybody. See you later.
See you. Bye-bye.
Good night.